Morning, dears. How are you? Today we will study story The Prince and the Pauper, chapter 14, page 35. Let's start. But before reading chapter 14, I will remind you with some of the most important points that we studied during chapter 13. Let's start. Miles Hendon refused to let Basil tell anyone in the village that he was still alive because he was afraid that Arthur might kill him when he got out of prison, and Miles had a plan. Miles wanted to meet Sir Marlowe in London because Marlowe knew Miles. He was with him in the war. He knew that he wasn't killed, so he wanted to take him to the king to get his house and the money back. Now open your book, chapter 14, The New King. When Miles and Edward arrived in London again, there were crowds of people in the streets. They wanted to see their new king, said Miles. And I am here, said Edward, but I can't go to the palace. The soldiers will not open the gates for me. I have to think of a plan. They found a room. Sir Miles, said Edward, bring me a pen and paper. I want to write a letter. Now, why couldn't Edward go to the palace? Edward couldn't go to the palace because the soldiers wouldn't open the gates for him. Who are you writing to? Asked Miles. He laughed to the king. He won't read letters today. Today he has more important things in his head. Edward sat and thought, I am king, but how can I show them that? He said, what do I know? And what does Tom not know? What does nobody in the world know? Only me. Yes, there is one thing. He quickly wrote something down. Now, he said to Miles, let's go to Westminster. Now, what did Edward want to write? Edward wanted to write something that he could only know and no one else. They quickly came to the gates of Westminster Palace. Tom was ready in the great room, in the prince's finest clothes. The great lords and ladies of England were ready. Lord Hertford and Lord Somerset waited with Tom. At the door stood Sir Humphrey Marlowe with his soldiers. Suddenly there was a loud noise at the gates. Men shouted and fought. Sir Humphrey turned to one of his men. What is happening? Go and see, he said in his ear. Now, who were in the great room, and what did they hear at the gates? Tom was in the prince's finest clothes in the great room, and the great lords and ladies of England were ready. Lord Hertford and Lord Somerset waited with Tom. At the door stood Sir Humphrey Marlowe with his soldiers. And what did they hear at the gates? They heard a loud noise at the gates. Men shouted and fought. The soldier quickly came back. There is a man there with a boy. The man says that he is Miles Hendon. The boy says that he has a letter for the king, but he also says that he is the king. Miles Hendon, said Sir Humphrey. I remember him from France. He's a fine soldier and a good man. What is he doing in a fight at the palace gates? Tom came to Sir Humphrey. Did he say a boy? A boy with a letter? Yes, your majesty. Bring them here. But, your majesty, this is not the time. Sir Humphrey started to say. Now, what did Sir Humphrey say about Miles Hendon? Sir Humphrey said about Miles Hendon that he remembered him from France. He was he was a fine soldier and a good man. What was he doing in a fight at the palace gates? I am ordering you, said Tom. Bring them to me now. I want to see them. So the king's soldiers brought Miles and Edward into the great room. When Tom saw Edward, he was very happy. Your Majesty, he cried, you are here. He is going mad again, said Lord Hertford. What can we do? Edward gave Tom his hand and Tom stood up. Take that boy, Sir Humphrey ordered his soldiers. He looked at Edward. Now, how did Tom feel when he saw Edward? Tom was very happy and he cried when he saw Edward. Stop! Cried Lord Hertford. Look at their faces. They are the same. Which boy is our king? Perhaps our king is not mad. Perhaps our king is not the king. Perhaps he really is a pauper. Everybody in the great room started to talk at the same time. What question can we ask them? Said Lord Somerset. What questions can only Edward answer? Now, what did Lord Somerset think of? Lord Somerset thought of asking Edward a question that he could only know and no one else. Lord Hertford turned to Edward. He asked him questions about King Henry, about Edward's mother, about Westminster Palace, about Lady Mary, Lady Elizabeth, and Lady Jane. Edward answered the questions, but said Lord Somerset, I can answer those questions too. What does only the king know? Can we read your letter, your majesty? Said Tom to Edward. Now, what did Tom ask Edward about? Tom asked Edward to let him read his letter. Edward gave the letter to Lord Hertford. It said, where is the great seal? Lord Hertford turned to Tom. I asked your majesty before your father died. You didn't know the answer. Can you tell me the answer now? I don't know the answer because I am not the king. How many times do I have to tell you that? Answered Tom. Look under the large cup of the highest shelf in my room, said Edward. You will find it there. Lord Hertford left the room for 5 minutes. Everybody waited and nobody spoke. Then they heard Lord Hertford. Now, what did the letter say? The letter said where the great seal was. He is right. He is right. I have the great seal. The king is the pauper. The pauper is the king. And everybody in the room bowed to Edward. Their young king well, nearly everybody. Miles Hendon stood with his mouth open. He didn't bow because he couldn't move. Now, what did Hertford say after getting the great seal, and what did everybody in the room do? After Hertford got the great seal, he said that Edward was right and he had the great seal. The king was the pauper was the king, and everybody in the room bowed to Edward, their young king. Well, nearly everybody. Miles Hendon stood with his mouth open. He didn't bow because he couldn't move. Now, let's answer some questions together. Number one, I am king, but how can I show them that? Who said that and when? Prince Edward said that when Prince Edward and Miles arrived in London and they saw a lot of people waiting to see their new king. B. How did the speaker show them that? He showed them that when he wrote a letter to tell them about the place of the Great Seal, as he was the only one who knew its place. Number two, what does nobody in the world know? Only me. Who said that? Prince Edward said that. B. What did he know but nobody didn't? He knew the place of the Great Seal and nobody else knew about it. We have finished. Thank you. Hoping you enjoyed the chapter. Goodbye.